webinar of the Team Society webinar series. Just to give you a reminder of what Team Society is, you can think of it as a sort of a platform across NTNU for promoting and showcasing social science and humanities perspectives on energy and sustainability issues. So it's strongly institutionally backed by NTNU Energy and NTNU Sustainability. In this third webinar, we have no less than a trio presenting. I've heard now that Jens Røyrvik will be given the presentation, but this is also backed by Berit Nielsen and Trond Berge, and they represent here a combination of the Department of Anthropology and NTNU Social Science. So they have prepared a talk for us entitled Empowering Citizens and Neighborhoods by Co-Creating Extended Realities for Low-Cost, Energy-Efficient Answers to Energy Poverty. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. And Jens, I will just give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll share the screen, etc. Can you let me know if it's the correct one? Can you now see the presentation?
Pioneer, yes.
Okay, so thank you for inviting us. So the very short and sexy name of the presentation, Empowering Citizens and Neighborhoods by Co-Creating Extended Realities for Low-Cost, Energy-Efficient Answers to Energy Poverty, is actually the title of a proposal that was sent into an H2020 program. Okay. I can see there's a chat also. I'll open it. So Christian, you like the title, great. This is, and yeah, by the way, please write questions or comments in the chat. I'll look at it while I'm talking. And for especially Berit and Trond, please correct me or come with comments while I'm talking. So it's a proposal. The short name is Pioneer, and the long name is then something I'll not repeat once more. The project is about energy poverty, and this is just an illustration of three phases that we are kind of seeing that are included in this proposal. It's about identifying energy poverty. It's about having pilots and solutions tested, and upscaling after trying those pilots and these testings. And I'll present this proposal shortly, but the main point of this presentation, and I think the main point that I hope we can discuss, is some assumptions that lies in calls such as this, and how we sometimes struggle a bit to make proposals that on the one hand meet the theories or the assumptions in the calls in H2020 calls, and on the other hand is a project that we would like to do, that we can kind of believe in and yeah, want to have and do, and etc. So that's the main point of this proposal, to see how the call was, how we struggled with that call, and how it ended up. And I'll stop this presentation with a few questions related to that. Okay. So this is the call. It's mitigating household energy poverty. And for those who are not familiar, this code LCSC3EC2 2018, 2019, 2020 is a code identifying what type of call it is, who it's targeted against, what kind of agency it's that are responsible for it, etc. And this is the main text of this call, and it's a bit interesting to look at what it's about before we go into how we kind of found a solution for it. So the specific challenge, as you see, is that it's an increased share of income used or spent on energy in different households, and that this leads to more energy poverty. And it says that there are, of course, poverty is the main reasons, but it's they say that there is some assumptions about efficiency measures and how increased use of renewable energy can help solve the issue. And they also claim that there's lack of sufficient knowledge about energy poverty as a phenomenon, and also about the available support schemes and how they work. And in the scope further down, you can see that the scope is to understand the types and needs of energy poverty, how to identify them, and there's dimensions such as gender differences that comes into play. So you can say that this text and this challenge was something that we were a bigger group writing it, got really interested in. Energy poverty is a really interesting both concept and phenomenon, etc. And it would be really interesting to work with it and try to find, you know, how can a society handle energy poverty. Okay, so this is kind of the background text, and from this background text, there are some points of proposed action that really tells us something about how kind of the assumptions of how to handle it. The first one you can see is the facilitate behavior change. Okay, so there's something about behavior change that can do something about energy poverty. So that's the one kind of theory behind it, and that we as researchers and the project can do something about people's behavior so that energy poverty can be handled, so to speak. The next one is that it's financial and non-financial support schemes. And if you go into the program, this is a very interesting one because it's kind of assumes that types of investments could be done to handle energy poverty. And finally, there's also investments and in the building stock, develop, test, and disseminate innovative schemes for energy efficiency areas investments. So these are kind of the what you can read in this text is that there's some assumptions and some theories about how or what energy poverty is and how it can be handled. Okay. So when we started working on this, we really wanted to work on this topic and this this topic and on this phenomena. But those assumptions that I mentioned now, it wasn't easy for our group because we didn't share a lot of these theories. We didn't share them. How to make poor people invest, how to make these schemes work for all of Europe, etc., etc. It was we didn't find a way to that our perspectives could handle that as a point of departure. And luckily, I was included in one of Christian's proposals. No, not proposals, projects, EU projects that is called Smarties. And one of those cases are really the starting point of how we started working with Pioneer. This is some pictures from Aeriva in Stockholm, Sweden. And that is a case in Smarties. Christian, please add something if I'm saying it wrong here. But what happened in Järva was that the city was supposed to renew the rental apartments, an area of the city called Järva. And that was a top-down process. And what happened was it was a lot of protests. And in Norway and some areas, we talk about svenske tilstander, Swedish conditions. And some of those examples come from the protests in this area. So it was a lot of protests against the renovation plans, etc. And the main reason for it, of course, is that renovation means more expensive housing and dwellings after the renovation. So the people who live there felt that they were pushed out of their area. It would become too expensive, etc., etc. So what happened was that the city did something that I'm a bit impressed of. They stopped this process and thought, okay, there is something happening here. And what they did was that they employed one of those who were in the forefront of the protests, activism there. And she was ethnically not originally Swedish, which was also one of the things in this protest and in this area. She was a resident there and she knew the situation. So hiring her was a very important thing. And what they did was they hired her to understand why was there so much protest. I mean, we just want to make nicer buildings and energy savings, etc., etc. And one of the things that she kind of identified right away was that, okay, protests and protesting is not passive behavior. This is activism, and it's people who are interested in their area. So what she started was a process that now is called the Järva dialogues. That was about inclusiveness, how to bring the people into the process, the people living there. And the picture here from the left is what they wanted to do was to renew the whole area, new buildings, etc. But what she started with was all of these projects that were not very, directly related to it. Stuff like bicycle projects to make people use the streets in a different way. It was targeted at the women and people who did not stay in the streets that much. It was projects of arts in the street to make it feel different, new green areas, and a lot of these different things. And one of the most important ones was, if you see the picture with the girl in there, it was democratic processes. So they invited people to come with suggestions of how departments should look, who should reside there, etc. So they had a saying in how the development should be, the process should be, and every building area, building group of buildings had representatives that were representing the ones living there to the city. So they were in a dialogue constantly, and those representing was always a man and a woman, and changing in different ethnic origins, etc., etc. So a representation there was very important, and voting, and also contributing to drawings very specifically. One type of activities that was started was more directly, like new energy sources, as you see a picture of here. And one of the really interesting things that was discovered when working on this was that there was so much resources in the neighborhood. So people who lived there, who knew stuff, who were technicians, who could work on rooftop energy, sun energy. They knew how to fix things and build. And so it was a change from this protest to activism and to produce and be a part of this process, because it was not a top-down process anymore. It was a very different one. And well, I can talk a lot about this, but the final picture here is the swimming pool. So all these positive things ended up with positive attitudes and new stuff happening. So it was a very a very interesting process to see. And interestingly, after the rejuvenation of the area, more than 90%, I think it was something like 95% of the citizens moved back into their flats. So it was considered a big success. So this story, this dialogue, and Christian, you have to write if you're okay with how I presented the Aeriva now. But this example and gave us an answer to how to work on energy poverty without taking all of these assumptions from the call, taking that as a starting point. So we made this proposal. This is a drawing of kind of our concept. The first thing you say is identify energy poverty, because what is energy poverty? Just from the get-go, it can mean that you are poor, so you cannot buy energy, or it's not enough energy, so you cannot get enough energy. But there's also all these different types of reasons. It can be what kind of group you are. It can be in infrastructural things. It can be so many things that are the reasons behind, and what should I say, the dependencies producing energy poverty. So identify what energy poverty actually means and what it means in context was one of the things that we really wanted to work on. And we tried, okay, but we will try to make it more abstract from these very specific, context-specific places, and produce archetypes. So say that there are different types of energy poverty that doesn't have to be this type in that land and this type in that land, but kinds that can be all over Europe. So we can kind of see that there are different types of energy poverty. Next step is to come with flexible solutions that are tailor-made to the archetypes and that are context sensitive. Well, something about the archetypes, by the way, that is really important, is that we thought that to make it really a good process, it had to be a co-production process. So we did not come with archetypes ourselves, but that was supposed to be described within the pilot context. Yeah, that is a very important part of how we thought we could do it. But to make some tailor-make solutions to those archetypes, that is focusing on empowerment, democracy, etc. Try out these solutions in pilots throughout Europe, evaluate it, and then focus on upscaling and capacity building. That's the concept, kind of. So this is just a drawing of the co-creation process, and as you can see, there is again this inspiration from Aeriva, that looking at what is the specific issue. So you have that the first picture there, it's protests, and the next is to find out what the solution is, and then to develop it. But the point here is that it's not protests all over, different types of starting points in different areas and different issues. So to recreate and translate Aeriva to a European context, that is kind of the first important step here. And then for the solutions, these are measures that are kind of that is expected from a project such as this. So we grouped it in 3 different measures: reducing energy requirements, measures to secure investments, and measures aimed at modifying behavior into consumption. So so here you can see that, okay, we try to have this principle, but start the translation towards a theory that we can see in the call. And co-creation process, very important for us in this project to have that context sensitivity and try to not have that top-down way of thinking about it. As I said, it's kind of a trying to learn from the different places what is the important dimensions of energy poverty in different places and what is common, etc., etc. Berit told me not to say etc., etc., because I do that always presuming that you all know what I mean, but I'm always doing it, it seems. And we also have we have included this new technologies, and especially VR components in the upscaling process of it, upscaling capacity building process. That we thought was really funny in this project to find out ways to model the future in different areas and to let people come in to VR models of their neighborhoods and try it, and let experts from different places visit each other's neighborhoods and play with how to make it different. So kind of constructing something like Aeriva in different places, and yeah, it's it started off with how can we use VR, and it ended with well, this looks like it can be kind of interesting. Okay, I see my time is moving fast. So I just show you the partners included in this project. As you can see, it's quite a lot, and there are both research partners and user partners. And what we learned was that especially the user partners, they are really skeptical towards these energy poverty calls, and also the energy poverty projects that do include the assumptions that I mentioned at the beginning. Because as one said, the assumption is economical rational, and it's not as easy as that. So when we tried to develop this project, they all said yes on the kind of, because it tried to get around some of these assumptions, and especially that of moving from the individual to the collective, making the responsibility a collective one, thinking about identity, thinking about what should I say, context specificity and not universality. And it's not the poor person who should invest to get out of energy poverty. It's a neighborhood, it's a collective focus. So that was really important to see that for those in this situation working on energy poverty, that was the focus on co-creation, the focus on the collective, etc., was really important for them. But then in a call such as this, we end up with, okay, we can try to have these concepts and try to move around the assumptions, or not move around, but to work and be a bit creative with assumptions. But then there is this very specific things that should come out of a project. So you can think of it as the product of the project. The effect should be to do something with energy poverty, but the products to do that is these things, and they are the impact, and they are listed. And as you can see, it is primary energy savings, investments in sustainable energy, contributions to policy development, support schemes established, and involvement of many Euro citizens or consumers. So the three last points were not very difficult for us, but especially the two top points are really the products that underlies the assumptions from the call. So you cannot get away from it because you need to produce what the theory says you should produce. So this is how we solve it, right? With a lot of calculations. So we calculate everything and show that, well, we have a lot of energy saving, we will get a lot of investments. But in truth, the steps from the concept to those answers are legitimating. It's kind of, we want the concept first and then we produce and show how we can produce what they say we want to produce. But the main point, I would say, and the main result is different from these tables or different from these things that we use. Of course, we have to reproduce it if we get the project, but this is something that is making it more difficult to do what we think is important to do, to have these very what should I say, technologically expressed measures of impact. Of course, there should be impact, but these are very much related to the theory from the call. So you can say that this is kind of from the left top to the right bottom, there's a translation going on. And you can see the red box of impact is only, the arrow there would only go to the call, and our project, our concept is a bit messy in that. And we are trying to make that messiness into a very clear, technologically expressed measures in the end there. But this is kind of how that process would look like then. Okay, so I think I've used my time and more than that, but I wanted this presentation to just show you these assumptions, how we work with it, and kind of I would say the difficult issues that we are left with, and maybe these assumptions in the call and assumptions, especially in the impact, could stand here as a for the discussion. What do they encompass? What do these impact categories kind of hold in terms of theories, assumptions, and is this how to fix energy poverty, something like that. Thanks.
Great. Lots of stuff to think about there and to delve into. So, but before we do that, one of the kind of things that we want to achieve with these webinars is also increase dialogues between different communities at NTNU. So every time we try to ask someone to prepare some comments, questions, and this time we have Hilde Refsti from the Department of Geography, who has been willing to do that. So I'll give the floor to you before we open for a wider debate, Hilde.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this presentation, Jens, which was really good, and also to Team Society for inviting me as a discussant. First of all, Berit, Jens, and Trond, if you're all here, I think you have a very interesting proposal. And I also find it really useful to get insight into different ways of working with research proposals. And especially as with this case, where you disagree with some of the assumptions set out in the actual call, because I think that is something that many of us can relate to, but not everyone has the courage to actually challenge research calls or their underlying assumptions. So I think you've done that in a very clever way. So I have 3 sets of comments and main questions that I would like to ask you, and I will ask them together so that you have some more time to think and respond, and maybe others can jump in as well. And one is oriented towards what I just said about challenging assumptions in research calls. In your experience, I'm wondering, is this common to do? And what do you think the chances are of your project being rejected because of this? And what I'm getting at is that if you could elaborate even some more on what your motivation has been for spending both time and energy on doing this, because we know preparing proposals takes quite a lot of time. And maybe also to reflect a bit on what sets you in the position to do so. And if this is something you would argue is our responsibility as researchers to do. Because I think it's really important, and personally I would have liked to see us researchers do this much more. My second set of questions is around what you propose as an alternative way of working with energy poverty in your proposal, which is focused on, as you said, collective solutions, participation, and co-creation. because these are approaches and methodologies I worked with in a lot of different settings. And I see that citizen participation and co-creation with living labs and other forms of engagement has become incredibly popular in the recent years, especially in connection with sustainability research. And it's now, I think, even almost a bit rare to find research or proposals, at least in my field, that do not promote one form or another of citizen involvement. So what I am to say now is a bit of a comment, not just to your proposal, but also to the sort of wider trend. But I would like your reflections on it, because participation and co-creation it can be used in very different ways. It can be empowering, of course, but it can also be a tool for control, or what I recently been reading a recent article by Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian sociologist who many of you probably know, who's quite infamous, that calls many of the types of co-creation and participation we see today as functioning as a type of foreclosing of important political debate. And with that in mind, I wanted to bring up this cartoon from your proposal that you showed just a bit earlier as well. Let me see its screen here. And you see it now? No. Now, I assume? Yes. Because you use this cartoon to illustrate your approach. And you say in your proposal that you draw on participatory democracy principles through co-creation by involving relevant actors and stakeholders in defining and also identifying energy poverty and also finding solutions to it. But at the same time, you say quite early on, and several places in what you sent me before and in your presentation now, or at least in what you sent me in advance, that you do this with an emphasis on social cohesion as a way to, yes, encourage cooperation, but also to curtail resistance, which is a word that was used, in order to distribute risks and make investments and experiments more attainable, and to avoid resistance in the implementation process. And this is a little bit of a trigger for me, and I warned you a bit about this in advance, that I'll probably challenge you on this co-creation methodology, because it gets very close to what is described as manipulation on this famous ladder of participation. And I will get this one up here, because I'm actually holding a lecture tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock on citizen participation, so I had it quite ready. And this is the old one by Arnstein. And again, this is more of a comment to the general trend and discourses on participation and co-creation that we see these days, and not necessarily on your project specifically. And of course, sometimes it is the bottom of this ladder that we want. But if you could reflect some on if there is a gap between what you describe as democratic representation and co-creation in your processes, and what participation in your project then is meant to do, or this function, or if you don't see it as attention. The third comment is about how I really like that you in your proposal challenge this individualization of poverty. And you point to a number of systemic factors, such as low income, poor housing, lack of access to reliable infrastructure, diversified access to affordable and reliable power supply, and so on in your proposal. And also point to this importance of collective solution finding, which, although I've provided some points of reflection, I think is very, very important. I noted, though, that you don't, and it might be in parts of the proposal that I haven't seen, but that you don't specifically mention social or economic inequality any place specifically. And I wanted to ask, is this a conscious choice, or could you say something about it? And it gets a little bit back to the sort of solutions being proposed, because what I think your proposal does really well is to suggest this move of problem definition and solution from the individual level to the community level. But then, is that enough? Will that address the sort of root problems that you're also pointing to? And I'm not saying that one proposal like this can do all of this, but I wonder if that is something that you have discussed in the process or not. So, and just finally, as I said, what I am bringing up now is really some overarching questions that I think there are few correct answers to, but I think it's important that we are conscious of. So, to summarize, the first one on challenging assumptions in research calls, the second one on how we use participation and co-creation, and the third one on levels of interventions and how that corresponds to the problems identified. So quite a lot at once, but it would be great to hear your thoughts and also the thoughts of other people in the webinar on this. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Thomas, should I just answer?
Yeah, I think that was really great framing of the debate. So if you probably take some time to reflect on that before we open for the floor, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I can answer some of it, but some of the questions is really something I'd really like to hear different voices on, because what you describe very well here is actually the point of departure of what I tried to present. It's this problem between assumptions that you need to meet and perspectives that you try to meet them with. Just the idea of solutions to energy poverty is a problematic one, I would say. It's both to energy and poverty, and I think there's been quite some attempts for fixing it before, and so we have to write it as if there is some solutions we are coming with, right? So what you're pointing at is this very precise thing that we are now producing. So with this project, we are producing a world which is looking like this, without conflict, without its harmony, and no one is energy poor, etc., etc. It doesn't say that, but it's kind of the very easy description. And then you say that, well, then are you manipulating those who don't want the world to be like you are designing it to be? Are you, etc., etc.? And the answer, I would say, is yes. It is a in a solution such as this, we are kind of agreeing with the really main assumption that that it is a question of top-down policy, actually, to manipulate the world in such and such a way to make it more energy efficient or less energy poor, and etc., etc. So we are accepting some of this core, and we have to do that if we are trying for such a project. So that's kind of just to agree with you. It's just to say that there are some really problematic things that we are trying to get around as good as we can, actually. That's the answer there. So that was kind of in the end of your question. So to start with the first one about challenging. So what I'm saying is it's a very pragmatic challenge. So we are trying to meet all the criteria to get the project. And I know that we are meeting all the criteria, but we are questioning one very important element. And if we are to get it, then we need those who evaluate our proposal to kind of agree and to see this point. And if there is only one project that will get funded, we are not going to be the one, because at least one of the projects will meet also that core question. But if there is more than one, then perhaps this can be an interesting one, because it's experimental and have some different perspectives. So what was your second question? Sorry.
Sorry, my second question was the one on co-creation and participation. If there's a tension in the way you say what you say you want to achieve and the function of what you're proposing.
Yeah, so I think there is at least on a theoretical level, there is a tension in, say, that you are saying this and saying something else. But but what we are, I think, is quite okay here is the part where co-creation is, what should I say? Co-creation is part of identifying what is the situation and also what we want to do. And the tension, I would say, goes to especially, at least, to that this is going to be used for a end result that is already decided. So co-creation is then included as an instrument towards a very specific goal. So the goal is already established and described. But I would say that this exactly the tension that you're referring to, I think in praxis kind of can be well, it will not be that big of a tension, I think, because it'll be very specific and very different processes in different areas of Europe. Yeah. But so to sum up my point here, or to my response here, is that I really think that you have nailed what I see as well as the interesting part here, is that there is some assumptions of that we are don't agree with, but still agree with when making such a proposal. And yeah.
Great. Do you want to follow up on this, Hilde, or should we open for further discussion?
Yeah, I think I only wanted to add another impact that you might have with sort of challenging it pragmatically as you do is maybe that the ones that are making the calls and then also read your proposal, even if they don't fund it, then maybe they'll adjust somehow. I mean, that's but yeah, let's open the floor.
Yes, we have quite a few participants, so if we can use either the raise hand function or the chat to signal that there is a comment or question, that would be great. So feel free. Usually not a challenge with a group of social scientists and humanities scholars like this, but let's see. If not, then I can definitely. Oh, Robert is ready with a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jens, of course, for this very interesting presentation. I was wondering, just at the conceptual and theoretical level, did you pay explicit attention to the notion of trust? And then I mean both trust from the government to the public, and the other way around, the trust of the public to the government, because you present a successful case of co-creation here. I would probably not have a hard time finding at least 5 examples where this all goes in quite different directions. Where in my very bird's eye diagnosis now, I would blame much of this on a lack of trust. How did you go about this? Think about this?
Yeah, very good question. So trust and distrust is at the core, as you say, and the case I presented is actually, I would say, is about something that is first founded in distrust and then founded in trust. So there's a change there going on, and I would say that and rightly so. I mean, from a citizen point of view, you should not have trusted the first process, but then the second one seemed to be more trustworthy, maybe. The trust would be a very important dimension in all cases and all pilots, I would say. And different countries would have different ideas of what trust means, how you're dependent on it, and also how trust between citizens and government and local government, etc. And also, I would say that I would guess that in all cases, trust would be a dimension that would be really important. So you're of course right. Trust and distrust is important in this. This description of the situation, at least, and also in probably in handling. But and I would also, back to Hilde's points, it's not like to make people trust, but to handle the issue of, okay, so what is not trusted and who is not trusting, etc.
Yeah, thank you for this answer, which makes perfect sense, of course. I would like to add, I would intuit that if your process of co-creation is aimed at making a localized version of the aims and purposes and methods that you want to deploy, then you should also take into account that this building of trust is itself very much a localized thing. So that might stand in the way for these issues to be generalized over different situations.
Yeah, I very much would think so as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Do we have more hands in the room? Currently, we don't. Then I'll sneak in a question because I thought this was really great, and it tickles many of the things that trouble me, and I guess a lot of us in doing research, and especially this type of funding that we do quite frequently. So, but I wanted two parts to bring it back to one of the things you didn't respond to in Hilda's comments, which I think is important, because on one level you critique, but on the other hand you also accept, and I guess you have to accept this idea that we can somehow solve it, in this case through co-creation, which is another way of framing a discourse around innovation or something like that. But Hilda noted this thing about social inequality, and I guess these things that are at the roots of parts of these challenges, although they might differ across spaces. So can co-creation, for instance, credibly be a challenge to, say, underlying class struggles or whatever it is, depending on your theoretical perspective, that underlies, and how uncomfortable would it be if you say yes to that question, to then also sort of continue to back up? I'm constantly guilty of this myself, so I don't blame you, but there's definitely for me a kind of tension then. And then the second one, because you mentioned that upscaling was a key issue, you just had it on a slide, you didn't say much about it, but given the kind of caveats that Govert pointed to, how do you address that in the proposal? How do you intend to scale up these things?
Okay, yeah, difficult and uncomfortable questions, I would say. It is, if I would be total, in like personal about it, I mean, I would say that this is one of the calls that are really targeting something really important. So I would very much like to work on it. It's super important, and I think it's not one of the worst calls at all that are focusing on. So for me, I saw a chance to actually have a project that I can stand behind to work on energy poverty, and that is actually quite rare. So while I'm kind of discussing the assumptions here, I also have to say that it's a bit impressive that they have tried to look at these elements in such a topic. So it's kind of so that's important to say. This is really, really important issue, and this is a way to work on it, to be really honest about why and how I feel about that. And then there is this okay, so what are you then bringing into it if you get such a project? What are you the representative of Darth Vader or not? And so we are trying to have tried to write a kind of way into it that don't overrule or don't take all these issues aside. So we want to bring it to the foreground. So social inequality is something we have written quite a lot about, and we want this to be a thing that you need to discuss and see and actually take seriously if you are to discuss energy poverty. So so my very pragmatic and honest answer when you ask these things is that I see this as a chance to bring all these things to the foreground one way or another. And the biggest trouble here is that to, on the one hand, do that, and on the other hand, produce enormous amounts of saved gigawatt hours, and you know, so it's this. But we have tried to make a project that can do both, actually. So that's kind of our what we want to do, and then let's see how that goes. What was the last? Oh, the upscaling part. Yeah, so that is also one of these very specific, and you know it from all your projects yourself, Thomas. Upscaling is you want it, and then you think that, well, is it possible? And this is, for us, this is one of the reasons why we talk about these archetypes. So we are trying to not make it as one country one, but to have archetypes of different types of phenomena, different kinds of phenomena, different types of energy poverty, and say that solutions and way to handle it is related to context specific and cultural specific, equality specific, etc. Phenomena. So we have a plan for it, and we have like an idea, and yeah, so that's I think my best answer to that.
Great. There's a comment from Hilda.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you brought up, Thomas, about sort of co-creation and participation as a mean to address some of these deeper root causes that you, Jens, say you bring to the forefront, which I really think you do, without necessarily saying social and economic inequality and so on. But also, I mean, in my research, which has been outside of the European context in very, very different places, we published last year this article, which is based on a larger research project, where we talk about, you know, does participatory planning promise too much? And I think that is a valid question, that it is often a sort of go-to solution that has part of the solution, but then, you know, it needs to be connected with some other debates. And there is this localization trap that has been talked about for a long time, especially within development studies, where these types of approaches have been tested out for, you know, over 20 years now. And there we had this book coming out in 2001 on the tyranny of participation and, you know, the depoliticization that quite a few participatory mechanism leads to. And I think some of those questions could come into the debates now, especially as co-creation and impact is getting so closely connected in research calls and so on all over the place. So I think I'm coming with that sort of critical power perspective from that end. But yet I'm also a big proponent of using that as part of the solution. So maybe it's more about connecting the different levels, which I think is very difficult to do with these types of calls, probably. But you might have thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Again, we try to do that. We try to do it, or we say that we are going to do it, something like that. It's both a practical issue and a theoretical one. Kind of how do you deal with it? And but what I want to say is that I think that to bring these perspectives in as part of a solution, or perspectives that are needed to have a fixed solution, is perhaps, as you say, the most important point here, because or else there is this very easy one-size-fits-all economic rationality solutions that are alone. So it's kind of yeah, I think it's to identify the most problematic, what should I say, problematic aspects and bring it into the project. That's more interesting, actually.
And just to say, I guess there are many participants here at the webinar too, or have been involved in similar projects where these questions must have come up. I was just thinking.
Yes, if there are comments from others, they're certainly most welcome.
Could I ask just, since Christian is here, he's the coordinator of the project who had the Aeriva case. Just to ask you, Christian, if you, it would be great if you could, because one of the issues there is to translate Aeriva into Europe. You know, do you have, did you have any thought about that?
Well, in many ways, Aeriva is special, but in other ways it's not. And also Aeriva is not a success story in all eternity. So it went well for a couple of years. Just recently, I think some of the old conflicts are cooking up again there. So there's always the question of contextuality and how much can you learn from cases for scaling up to other places. But I think there is something that can be learned. And one thing that I've been thinking about after your comments, Hilde, is our way of democracy rigged for participatory planning, and I don't think it is, because the way we have organized democracy in Norway and in many other European countries is that we elect representatives and they have the authority to make decisions, and this is baked into the structure. So of course they can say that, yes, we listen to what people say and then we just follow what they advise, but the power of making the decision is essentially with representatives that we elect. And there are other forms of democratic organization that might make it easier to have real participatory planning processes. And maybe we need to discuss that at some point. And then I have a short comment to the calls and our way of dealing with them. I just want to say they don't come out of the blue. So there's a long process before where they are formulated and discussed, and where different, both academic and other societal stakeholders make their claim and point to what they want to see in those calls. And so there is always the possibility to get some perspective into calls if you put enough energy into the process before.
Great. So
can I just comment on something that Chris just thought I got very interesting what Christian said, and one of the assumptions that I just I'm kind of referring to, but maybe haven't talked about explicit, is this assumption about how research is an instrument for producing policy, and the policy is then to frame social activity, and that is kind of how the solution is going to be produced. So research is an instrument for policy, and policy then producing. So that is one of the assumptions that we need kind of to accept on one level, but then don't believe in it on another. Yeah.
Great. I think this is a conversation that we need to continue to have because it's super interesting and relates very much to our practice as scholars and practitioners and everything in between. But right now, I think it's actually time to end the webinar, not to hold up people's time. So I'll remind you that there is a new webinar in 2 weeks, 10th of November. And then we will actually be joined by a colleagues of Hilde from the Department of Geography, Asbjørn Karlsen, who will then be talking about slightly different topic, but policy mixes for just sustainable development. And he'll be discussing different petro-maritime regions in Norway. So make sure you return for that. Thanks to everyone for coming, and especially the contributors. So until next time, bye.